She was told to wait in the hangar. No reason given. No incident logged. Her name was printed at the bottom of the manifest, not assigned to a flight. Just present. One by one. The others were called forward. She stayed behind. Silent. Overlooked. Outside. The mission was already underway. Inside. Someone revised the roster again. Her line disappeared. Hours later, the base went quiet. The runway cleared, voices lowered. Then a different name was spoken, not from the control tower, from the returning flight crew. And suddenly, the story wasn't about who had authorization. It was about who had acted when no one else could. And then everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The wind pulled hard through the canvas walls of the forward operations tent, kicking up a line of dust that traced across the concrete pad outside like static on a screen. The UH-60 Blackhawk shimmered under its floodlight canopy, rotor blades at rest, but already pointed toward the ridge On the roster board inside the tent, names were scrawled in thick black marker. Mason was listed as lead, co-pilot slot blank. No mention of Callie. Not there. Not erased. Just never added. She stood beside the crate stack near the rear flap, her boots chalked with sand, gloves looped through her belt. The clipboard in her hand held the checklist she had already memorized. It didn't matter. Her voice hadn't been requested during pre-flight. The deck chief had nodded at her once, then moved past, as if she were another tied-down pallet. Mason arrived late, sunglasses still on, even with the light dying fast. He clapped one of the crew chiefs on the shoulder, laughed loud enough for everyone to hear, and unrolled a laminated terrain profile with a casual flick. He said they would thread it like always, sliding south, following the wash, and kissing the plateau from the blind side. Textbook. He didn't look toward Callie. He added that the co-pilot was just riding brakes. A few crew members chuckled. One muttered something about autopilot's backup having softer boots this time. No one corrected him. Callie unfolded her own chart without a word, a smaller sheet marked in pencil. Not command issue. A hand-drawn grid of slope patterns, downdrafts, and likely blind zones based on 3 weeks of recons and one old thermal drift overlay. It was folded into her left sleeve, creased from use. She hadn't shown it to anyone. Outside, dusk dropped fast over the valley. Wind tugged the corner of the mission tent open and clattered a stack of helmet crates just hard enough to be noticed. Mason pulled his flight gloves tight and gestured toward the pad. He said to get it spun, reminding everyone they were not the ones getting rescued tonight. Callie followed the group out. Her name was never called. She didn't expect it to be. She stepped onto the edge of the floodlit concrete where the rotor wash had kicked dry grit into shallow arcs. The aircraft loomed tall in silhouette. Her boots made no sound beneath it. Her breathing was quiet and deliberate, each step part of a rhythm no one else heard. As Mason pulled himself into the front seat, he didn't turn around. A crew chief walked past Callie and handed her the door manifest without a glance. She took it, signed it, and clipped it into the console. No one asked if she was ready. The skids creaked as the others climbed aboard. Callie slid into her seat and ran the pre-power sequence from memory. Her fingers moved quickly, pausing only once to reach into her sleeve and touch the folded edge of her own map. Then she clipped in. No one expected her to fly. The blades cut through night air as the Blackhawk lifted clean off the forward pad, its nose angling toward the ridgeline beyond the outer markers. Callie monitored the engine torque and vertical speed from the left seat, her fingers light on the panel as the low thrum turned to a sustained vibration. The climb was sharp, but smooth. Beneath them, the desert dropped away into canyon. Inside the cabin, cargo straps swayed slightly. Wind caught the edges of a red tarp in the rear hold, snapping it once before it settled. Callie reached for the trim tab and adjusted the lateral drift by 1/2 degree. A small deviation, but the wind index was climbing faster than forecast. She noted the change without comment. Mason chuckled into the mic and leaned back in his seat. He said the ridge wasn't going to give them trouble unless it had grown 500 feet since last month. His voice had that same tone as earlier, sure, unbothered, a shade too loud. The valley floor disappeared behind them. Visibility dropped in uneven bands, fog rolling off the high shoulders of the plateau like smoke over glass. Callie watched the nav return blink once. Then again, Mason tapped the screen and muttered something about faulty uplinks. He didn't seem concerned. A gust hit them broadside, harder than expected. The aircraft rocked, skids yawing slightly to the left. Mason corrected, but his inputs came slower than they should have. The nose dipped. He steadied it, then cracked a joke about blindfolds and gravity. Callie didn't laugh. She tapped the fuel mix readout and pulled up the manual override screen. The trim lag she had noticed on climb-out was back barely visible, but present. They were 7 clicks from the LZ when it happened. Another gust slammed the aircraft, this time vertical and sharp, riding a pocket of inverted heat that hadn't shown on the last read. The nose jumped. Mason's shoulder bucked off the yoke, and he hit the top rail hard enough to echo. Callie turned fast. Mason slumped forward. His helmet knocked sideways. His hands fell from the controls. The aircraft wobbled, the pitch gyro chirping through a feedback burst that bled into the cabin channel. From the rear hold, one voice shouted. A second asked what just happened. The medic nearest the crew bench reached for the intercom, but static burst through it. No connection. The Black Hawk dipped again, rotor noise warping as the nose caught a tailwind and slid east. Callie gripped the controls. She checked Mason once his visor fogged, unmoving, then reached across and keyed manual trim control back to neutral. One crew chief stepped toward the flight deck and called her name. Uncertain. She answered without turning. She said Mason was down and she had the stick. The chief hesitated. His voice cracked. He asked if she was rated for terrain nav alone. She told him she didn't need it, not for this drop. Altitude dropped another 200 feet. The autopilot loop blinked in red, trying to compensate but locking out manual override. Callie cut it clean. She toggled to direct control, recentered the pitch line, and angled the nose toward a shadow she knew was the upper ridge elbow. No one spoke for several seconds. Warning tones fired again. The HUD flickered, then dimmed entirely. The backup display kicked in, dull and lagged by 3 seconds. The terrain follow system tried to reroute, but visibility was 0 and satellite sync was lost. Callie ignored it. She knew the ridge pattern from memory. She had spent 3 nights sketching it out from the control tower's second-story glass, using archived flight logs and low-band topography overlays. She leaned forward and adjusted the throttle, bringing the descent rate into stable hover band. Behind her, someone muttered that they were losing telemetry. Another crew member whispered a question about altitude. Callie replied without hesitation. She said they were fine. She could feel the heat shift through the pedals, knew the angle of the crosswind from the way her boot vibrated against the floor. This wasn't a crash. It was control finding shape through pressure. She dropped the collective by 2 degrees. The aircraft responded like it knew her. A faint ridge came into view through the fog. It wasn't their LZ, not yet, but it meant she was on track. The crew fell silent. One medic reached for the comm panel again. Still nothing. Mason groaned once in the front seat, but his head never lifted. His gloves twitched and settled. Callie rechecked the map in her mind. 3 bends, 1 wind shelf, drop, lift, ledge. She could feel the slope curve ahead of them, not because of a readout, but because of the way the wash slid against the frame. It felt like the thermal drift charts she had studied alone after the last sim rotation. It felt like the noise that told her where the air didn't want to go. She told the crew to brace. The medic nodded. No one argued. The skids tilted forward again. Callie trimmed with both hands. Her voice was low, calm, unreadable. As the terrain narrowed, Callie brought the airspeed down just enough to hold the corridor, feathering the pedals without needing to check the readout. Her eyes moved between the windshield and the shadow shapes rolling in through the fog. One of the crew members behind her leaned to look forward. He saw her profile jaw set, gaze fixed, hands adjusting by feel alone. The wind kicked again. A lesser pilot might have fought it. She let it lean them, then pulled them back into centerline with a half-second delay that absorbed the energy instead of resisting it. The bird flowed around the gust instead of against it. The youngest in the crew, barely out of qualification, whispered under his breath. He said he had never seen anyone fly like that, not even in the sim. Up front, Mason groaned again. A soft breath pulled through clenched teeth. He wasn't coming back yet. Callie didn't wait for anyone to recover. She trimmed once more, settled the stick, and checked the ridge marker as it slid beneath them in shadow. They were still flying, because of her. Rain lashed the windshield in sheets, beating against the cabin frame so hard it sounded like it might crack. The fog was thicker now, rolling in from the peaks ahead and curling down into the valley like smoke poured through mesh. Thunder sounded behind the mountains, low and drawn out, the kind that arrived a few seconds late but stayed long enough to be felt in the chest. The HUD was dark. The terrain follow system had locked itself into error mode. The backup display still flickered with ghost data. Callie didn't reach for the headset again. She already knew what it would return. Static. Maybe. More likely silence. She adjusted the stick by 3 degrees, banking the aircraft slowly to the left. The angle felt wrong. She paused, eased it back, then took her right hand off the yoke long enough to pull a folded sheet from her left sleeve. The map was soft with sweat. She didn't unfold the full chart, just opened it enough to confirm one thing. There was a ridge wall to the south that would curl inward after the next thermal. She had marked it in pencil. She closed the map, slid it back into her sleeve, and reset her grip. The Blackhawk hovered in the gap like a thing caught between calls. Inside the hold, the crew was quiet. One medic leaned forward, bracing with a hand against the bulkhead. Another sat near the evac stretcher, arm bandaged tight, eyes closed. Callie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her breath came even. Her posture didn't shift. The yoke gave her just enough feedback to sense the wind dipping. The next drift pattern would come from beneath them, not the side. She counted 3 seconds in her head, then tipped the nose down and let the descent begin. At first, the aircraft dropped clean. Then the wind snapped in from the west, lifting the left rotor just enough to torque the frame. She caught it before the crew noticed. To them, it felt like a twitch. To her, it was confirmation. They were near the thermal outflow she had traced the night she stayed late alone in the ops room, studying archived atmospheric overlays no one had used in years. The rain intensified. Fog flooded the windshield. The glass felt like a wall now, opaque and pulsing with reflected instrument lights. Callie tuned her hearing to the sound of the engine, not the visuals. There was a pitch to the rotor band she recognized when the bird was stable. It wasn't there yet. The rhythm was 2 steps off center. She adjusted the collective again, then leaned her boot into the pedal until the torque rebalanced. Her legs did the math without conscious thought. A voice from the back finally broke the silence. One of the load crew said her name, quietly, more like a question than a warning. She didn't answer. Her eyes were on the gray wall ahead. Another few seconds passed. Then she pulled slightly up, slowed descent by 1 notch, and corrected pitch with the right trim dial. It was a pattern, not a plan. The kind that came from repetition, not protocol. The skids caught the tip of an updraft, jolting hard. Someone in the back yelped. The aircraft twisted 1/2 degree right. Callie pressed into the turn, forcing it to complete instead of resist. She knew better than to wrestle the wind. You moved with it. You leaned into the shape it wanted, then guided it back. They leveled out 10 meters lower. She felt the tension in her wrist. Her glove had soaked through. She could feel the vibration from the stick more directly now, each bump registering along her knuckles. She welcomed the sensation. It told her more than the blank screen ever could. One crew member asked if they were still descending. Another started to answer, then fell quiet again. Callie adjusted throttle by touch, shaving speed gently. They were close now. She pictured the last sketch she made ridge to the north, a forked ledge to the east. The drop zone sat just past the second peak, nestled in a pocket of rock no wider than a school courtyard. It had been surveyed once and dismissed as too tight, but she had studied it anyway. The crosswind hit again, stronger this time. She let it take them half a body left, then countered slowly, waiting for the lull before resetting angle. She saw nothing out the window, just fog, rain, blur. But she knew. She reached up and shut down the remaining nav screen. The delay was starting to lie. From the front seat, Mason stirred. He groaned once, head lifting slightly. His voice came out slurred and hoarse. He asked where they were. Callie said, "Close." That was all. She rechecked trim. Her left hand flexed once, then settled. She could feel the air pressure begin to ease just a hair lighter, as if the ridge had finally opened its mouth to let them through. She dropped 2 meters. Now the terrain shifted again. She felt it. There was a dip beneath the nose and a bounce under the tail. They were over the shelf. She tightened her grip, slid her right hand back up the console, and eased the nose forward just enough to bring the skids into hover alignment. Wind howled against the fuselage. Rain pounded harder. But she could feel the slope of the ledge beneath them. It was time. She keyed the internal channel and spoke one word: brace. The moment the skids brushed the air above the ledge, Callie felt the turbulence die for a half breath. The downwash held. It was a pocket of stillness inside the chaos. She used it. Dropped again. Slow and level. The crew stayed silent. One of them gripped the wall beside the door. No one asked how she knew. They just waited. The Black Hawk settled inch by inch, invisible in the storm, flown by a woman no one had trusted with command. And now, they waited on her word. The ledge came into view not with light but with motion, a sudden stillness in the downwash, a horizontal flare in the vibration along the yoke, the faintest counter-echo from the canyon wall. Callie recognized the pattern. She had seen it once in a training overlay, that no one used any more thermal rise just before a drop plate. She let the Black Hawk hold for 1 second longer, then nosed it forward. The storm gave nothing back. No reference, no distance, just pressure and noise. Her fingers stayed on the stick, one gloved hand wrapped tight enough to blanch her knuckles. The other hovered over the trim dial. She didn't speak. There was no instruction to give. Her body did the reading. The air pushed against the belly of the aircraft in staggered resistance, the kind that meant elevation change below. She wrote it down. Wind blasted across the left side panel, hammering the fuselage. The skids tilted. She corrected without pausing. Her left boot held torque. The right kept the yaw steady. The slope beneath them was real now. She could feel it. From the cabin, the medic shouted that someone was waving. Callie couldn't see it, but she trusted the call. She adjusted pitch, dropped them another meter, and eased back just enough to let the skids skim. The plateau wasn't smooth. It had a lip. She felt it. One corner caught first. The Black Hawk bucked slightly, nose tipping. She flattened the collective and pulled the nose level in one clean movement. Rotor strain howled above her. Dust rose. Gravel scattered in violent spirals. The cabin door banged open. Wind tried to slam it back, but 2 of the crew locked it wide. One evac tech called out a head count. 5. No 6. Civilians crouched low behind a pile of rocks barely the height of the landing skids. One waved frantically. Hood soaked, face streaked with grit. Callie kept her eyes forward. She had to hold trim. The thermal drift was rolling underneath them, and the downwash was bouncing off the canyon wall now, creating a dirty loop that threatened to shove the aircraft sideways. The crew chief yelled for 5 seconds, then 10. Callie adjusted pitch again, holding the platform as level as she could without visual markers. Her right wrist started to ache. In the corner of her vision, someone's helmet skittered across the floor. She didn't flinch. A voice cracked across internal comms. They were loaded, all 6 inside. Callie waited 1 beat more, checked torque manually, and pulled lift. The aircraft screamed. They rose in a spiral, angled just enough to ride the rising draft instead of fighting it. The crosswind caught them hard on the exit. The nose yawed. She held it. One finger feathered the trim back in range. Another adjusted rotor pitch. Her legs braced beneath her like fixed gear. The darkness gave nothing. No sky, no ridge outline, no moon. She flew it by feel. The cabin rattled behind her. Someone was sobbing. Another voice asked if they were clear. Callie didn't answer. She banked them right and brought the pitch flat. The angle of the canyon told her everything she needed. There was a cutout at the northern edge of the range, a climbable wedge that traced out of the canyon in a gradual slope. It had been dismissed in the last mission brief too narrow, too sharp to exit on power alone. But she had traced it herself on an old terrain model weeks earlier. A runoff channel, updrafts, not downdrafts. If they hit it clean, the lift would come from beneath. She nosed them north. Rotor pitch climbed, blades straining against wind speed. The air was denser in this pocket. Her boots trembled against the pedals, not from fear, from tension. Her arms were locked forward, her spine pressed against the seat. The engines screamed. She let them. The nose came level, then higher. Then she felt the air split. Not a sound, not a shift, but a lift. The current broke upward. She caught it. The Black Hawk lifted through a crack in the canyon wall like a pin pulled from fabric. Rain flared against the canopy. The windshield cleared for half a second, enough to confirm what she already knew. They were out. Callie didn't release the controls. She let them climb another 100 feet before she even thought about easing throttle. Only then did she exhale. Behind her, a civilian sobbed once, then went quiet. One crewman leaned forward and looked through the front cabin. His voice didn't rise above a whisper. He asked who had flown them in. No one answered. The climb-out continued steady. Angle clean, vibration within band. Callie's wrist shook once. She let it. She turned the nose east toward the holding vector. They were past the ridgeline now. The storm was still with them. But it no longer mattered. The mission was done. She keyed the cabin mic and said they were returning. Nothing more. No one clapped. No one cheered. They sat in the dark, their lives held together by flight alone. And she flew. The youngest evacuee had been carried in by one of the medics wrapped in a soaked jacket, her legs dragging. She hadn't spoken during the lift. Now, sitting just behind the flight deck, she reached out and touched the console rail with one hand, eyes wide. She didn't know who had flown the bird. She didn't need to. The look she gave Callie wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. The rest of the crew had started to realize it too. The way she hadn't asked, the way she hadn't doubted, the way the aircraft had moved as if it was part of her. Someone whispered her name. No one corrected them. The wind outside kept rising. The rotors fought harder as they curved back toward base. Storm still thick across the valley. But inside the Black Hawk, no one moved. They were steady now. Ground would come. The pad would meet them. But for now, every single life on board hung in the balance of her hands. The lights of the forward pad cut through the storm in a tight fan, catching the curve of the rotors as the Black Hawk descended. The skids hit hard but even, one side a hair faster than the other, corrected mid-touch by a single adjustment to trim. The bird rocked once, then settled into place. Callie held the stick until the final tremor passed through the frame. Then she pulled the throttles down and let the blades cycle out. The rain hadn't eased. It streaked across the canopy in sheets, pinged off the tail boom and pattered on the tarmac in wild, uneven rhythms. The evac crew began to disembark without direction. They moved slow, but steady. One medic opened the cabin door. Wind shoved back, then gave way. Callie reached up and powered down the primary displays, fingers moving with tired precision. Her gloves were soaked through. She slid them off and set them next to the log panel, palms open to the air, skin raw from friction. Mason hadn't moved. A crewman was already leaning over him, checking pulse and response. He gave a quiet nod. Stable. Still out. Callie unbuckled and stood. Her back cracked from the tension she had been holding for what felt like an hour straight. She didn't speak. She stepped out of the aircraft into the rain. Ground crew had already arrived, heads down beneath plastic hoods, arms out with stretchers. The evac child was first. She was alert now, eyes wide, face turned toward the sky like she didn't know whether to cry or smile. As they wheeled her past, she twisted, searching for someone. Her gaze landed on Callie. "That one," the girl said, pointing with her left hand. "She flew us." No one responded, not immediately. Inside, ops. The watch officer glanced up from the incoming telemetry stream. His monitor had begun replaying the flight data, synced to cabin cam. He leaned closer, expecting to see Mason's call sign. Instead, the system had flagged an override event. Pilot ID matched to secondary control. Callie's name, time-stamped from 2 clicks before the ridge drop. The override remained active until touchdown. He replayed the footage. One angle showed the control stick. Another showed the right seat Mason, slumped, unmoving. The only hands on the controls belonged to the left. He tapped his earpiece and told the supervisor they needed to see something. In the corridor, a mechanic walking past ops heard the audio loop. The rotor strain during descent had a distinct rhythm heavy on final approach, then soft at 100.0 feet. He stopped, turned, listened again. That wasn't Mason's style. The mechanic stepped inside and looked at the screen. "Who flew it?" he asked. No one answered. The replay camera continued. It showed Callie's wrist, shaking once on final trim, then steady again. In the hallway, 2 crew members from the flight had stopped beside the gear rack. They weren't speaking loudly. One of them had taken off his helmet and was holding it at his side, like he wasn't sure what to do next. She didn't flinch. One of them said, "Not once." Another nodded. "I thought we were done." But she just flew. No exaggeration, no drama, just truth, settling into shape. Callie stepped through the side entrance of ops, hair slicked to her forehead, flight suit clinging to her back and shoulders. She walked like she wasn't sure whether to report in or disappear. One officer turned from the monitor and met her eyes. "You flew her," he said, not as a question. She didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to the floor. Water pooled around her boots. Someone pointed toward the console. The screen showed the flight overlay. Her inputs, mapped against wind pattern and elevation. It didn't make sense. The path was too clean. The corrections too precise. One of the techs whispered that it looked like sim data. But it wasn't. The girl was right. Callie flew them. In the rear of the room, the senior flight evaluator stepped forward. He had been silent the whole time, watching, his expression unreadable. He looked at the screen, then at her. His voice came low and steady. "That climb out? That wasn't Mason? Was it?" Callie shook her head. He nodded once, then he said nothing else. A second later, someone stepped out to update the logbook. They entered her name without asking, then added the flight number beside it. Her gloves still rested on the console, rain-darkened and unmoved. Mason's helmet had been set on the adjacent chair. It hadn't been touched. Callie turned away before anyone else could speak. She moved past the row of monitors, past the chartboard, and out toward the edge of the hangar where the debrief forms were stacked in a weatherproof bin. She took one, ink smeared on the corner where the paper was damp. But she didn't pause. A crewman passed her going the other way, nodded without words, and stepped aside to let her through. No one tried to stop her. Back outside, the storm was still pressing over the ridgeline. The pads glowed under sodium light. The Black Hawk sat where she had left it, doors open, engine cooling. The girl was still watching her from the stretcher as they wheeled her toward medical. She didn't wave again. She just watched, head tilted, as if memorizing something. Callie stopped at the edge of the light ring. She looked back once. Inside the tower, someone finally broke the silence. A younger officer at the back of the room asked why she hadn't said anything. No one replied. The question hung there, unanswered, but not ignored. Another tech played the descent footage again. They watched her hands work the controls with deliberate precision, no hesitation. Every motion was intentional, measured, They realized it wasn't instinct. It was practice. Callie hadn't flown on impulse. She had flown because she already knew how. And that truth, quiet as it was, began to settle into everyone who saw it. Then she stepped into shadow. The storm had moved off by the time the crews returned to quarters. The hangar lights stayed on, humming low, their beams stretched across the floor in quiet rows. Outside, the Blackhawk sat on its pad, rain still dripping from the rotor hub. No one touched it. No one rushed to reset or reassign. Inside, the lockers were half open, flight suits half unzipped, boots left beside benches without comment. Callie sat on the far side, shoulders bent forward, her helmet beside her on the wood plank. Her gloves had been wrung out and folded, seams frayed from the controls. She hadn't said a word since the pad. A report lay on the bench next to her. Someone had already typed the incident log. It listed environmental interference, pilot incapacitation, successful mission completion. The names were correct. So was the timeline. What stood out was the signature line at the bottom, Flight Reyes. Across the bay, someone updated the chalkboard. A hand in a gray sleeve wrote her name beside the tail number. No ceremony, no announcement. The line was quiet, clean. It stayed there without question. A moment later, one of the crew chiefs walked by, glanced up, and underlined it once. Then kept walking. Callie watched him go. She didn't move. Her suit was still damp, edges dark where the fabric hadn't dried. Steam curled faintly off the shoulders from body heat alone. Her hair had dried in wild waves down her neck. No one else was around her now. Just the open floor, the humming lights, and the Blackhawk out under the stars. One of the younger crew techs entered, saw her from a distance, then stopped. He didn't approach. He just looked at the bench, at the gloves folded there, at the way she sat still with her hands resting on her knees. Then he nodded to himself and turned back around. In the office above ops, a senior officer reviewed the logs for final entry. He paused over the pilot designation line. There was a slight hesitation in the way he reached for the key to finalize it. Then he pressed down, and the screen blinked green. Logged. Outside, the pads were silent. The wind had shifted. No more rain. Callie finally stood. She picked up her gloves and helmet, one in each hand, and walked to her locker without rush. Her steps were even. She didn't look at the board. She didn't have to. As she slid the helmet onto the shelf, something clinked against the metal. A small strip of fabric, half torn from a label, had caught on the inside lip. She took it, read the faded ink, the edge of her call sign, still stenciled faint from a year-old training flight. She smiled once, just barely, and left it there. When she stepped out into the night, the last puddle near the edge of the hangar reflected her shape clearly. She walked through it without pause. No one called her co-pilot anymore. Complete. You just witnessed a story about someone who was never supposed to lead. Callie was not the name they called at the mission brief. She was not expected to take control or to carry lives through a storm with no visibility, no backup, and no applause waiting on the other side. But she did. Because quiet strength does not need permission. It does not wait to be seen. Her story is not about proving them wrong. It is about knowing your worth when no one is watching, about stepping forward when the path is unclear, about flying steady when others falter. If this journey resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Would you have recognized her strength? Would you have seen her? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if these kinds of stories matter to you, consider following for more quiet, powerful moments of honor and resolve.